The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle, as Officer Sarah Mitchell adjusted her traditional red tunic and black bearskin hat. At 28 years old, she had been serving as a Queen's Guard for 3 years, following in the footsteps of her grandfather, who had protected the royal family decades earlier. The weight of tradition sat heavily on her shoulders, both literally and figuratively, as she prepared for what seemed like another routine day of ceremonial duties. Sarah had always dreamed of this role since childhood, watching the changing of the guard with wide eyes during family visits to London. Her path to becoming a royal guard had been anything but easy. Years of rigorous military training, physical conditioning, and psychological preparation had led to this moment. The selection process was brutal, with only the most disciplined and dedicated soldiers earning the honor of protecting the British royal family. The morning briefing was standard procedure. Officer Commanding gave the usual reminders about maintaining composure, staying alert, and representing the crown with dignity. Sarah listened carefully, though she could recite these instructions by heart. Today's assignment would see her stationed at the main entrance of Windsor Castle, where tourists and well-wishers often gathered to catch a glimpse of royal activity. As she took her position, Sarah noticed the usual crowd beginning to form. School children on educational trips, tourists with cameras ready, and local residents going about their daily business. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost festive, with people pointing excitedly at the guards and whispering about the royal family. Sarah maintained her stoic expression, eyes fixed straight ahead, a living statue in service to the monarchy. Among the crowd, she spotted several familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who visited almost daily with her small dog, hoping to see Prince George during his outdoor playtime. A group of international students taking photos for their social media accounts. The local news reporter who occasionally covered royal events for the regional television station. Everything seemed perfectly normal, exactly as it had been countless times before. What Sarah couldn't see was the growing tension in one particular section of the crowd. A man in his 40s, wearing a dark jacket and carrying a worn backpack, had been observing the security arrangements for several minutes. His name was David Crawford, and he harbored deep resentment toward the royal family stemming from personal financial troubles he blamed on government policies and what he perceived as royal privilege. David had lost his job at a manufacturing plant 6 months earlier when the company relocated overseas. His unemployment benefits had run out and his wife had left him, taking their 2 children to live with her parents. In his mind, the royal family represented everything wrong with British society: wealth, privilege, and disconnection from ordinary people's struggles. He had spent weeks planning this moment, convinced that making a statement would somehow address his grievances. As the morning progressed, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in the crowd dynamics. The usual cheerful chatter seemed subdued in one area, and she caught glimpses of someone moving aggressively through the group of onlookers. Her training kicked in immediately. Years of preparation had taught her to recognize potential threats, even while maintaining her ceremonial stance. The first sign of real trouble came when David pushed past a family with young children, causing a small commotion. The father of the family tried to steady his daughter, who had been knocked off balance, while the mother pulled their son closer to her side. Other tourists began to murmur and step away, creating a small circle of space around the increasingly agitated man. Sarah's eyes tracked the disturbance while her body remained perfectly still. This was the challenge of being a Queen's Guard, maintaining the ceremonial role while being ready to spring into action at any moment. Her colleagues at other positions had also noticed the developing situation, and she could sense the subtle shift in their alertness levels. David's voice began to rise above the general crowd noise. He was shouting about inequality, about how the royal family lived in luxury while ordinary people suffered. His words became increasingly aggressive and personal, directed specifically at Sarah and her fellow guards. Tourists began to back away more noticeably now, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unusual situation. The tension reached a breaking point when David stepped closer to Sarah's position, his face red with anger and his fists clenched. Security personnel in civilian clothes began moving through the crowd, but they were still several meters away. Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath and see the wild look in his eyes that indicated someone who had moved beyond rational thought. In that moment, Sarah faced the reality every royal guard trains for but hopes never to experience. The balance between maintaining dignity and ensuring safety, between following protocol and protecting the public, between being a symbol and being a human being. Her mind raced through her training, considering options and consequences while her body remained statue-like. David raised his voice to a shout, attracting the attention of everyone in the immediate area. His words were becoming more threatening, more personal, more dangerous. Children in the crowd began to cry, and their parents started moving them away from the scene. The festive atmosphere had completely evaporated, replaced by genuine fear and uncertainty. What happened next would change everything. As David took another step forward, clearly preparing to escalate his confrontation with Sarah, a small voice cut through the tension like a bell. Prince George, who had been playing in a secure area nearby with his protection officers, had somehow managed to get close enough to witness the unfolding drama. The young prince, barely 10 years old, appeared at the edge of the crowd with the kind of innocent curiosity that only children possess. His protection detail was immediately alert, ready to move him to safety, but George had already seen what was happening. The sight of someone shouting at one of his family's guards, someone who was there to protect him and his family, stirred something in the young royal's heart. What Prince George did next would be captured on dozens of phones, shared across social media platforms, and discussed around the world. But in that moment, as Sarah maintained her professional composure while facing an increasingly dangerous situation, no one could have predicted how one small boy's reaction would transform a frightening confrontation into something entirely different. Prince George stepped forward with the fearless confidence that only children possess when they see something wrong happening. His small frame seemed impossibly brave as he positioned himself between the angry man and Officer Sarah Mitchell. The crowd fell silent, phones raised and recording as the young prince looked directly at David Crawford with clear, steady eyes. "Why are you being mean to her?" George asked in his clear, young voice that carried across the suddenly quiet courtyard. "She's protecting my family. She's protecting everyone here." David stopped mid-shout, his mouth hanging open as he realized who had just addressed him. The anger in his face began to mix with confusion and something that might have been shame. Here was the very symbol of royal privilege he had been railing against. But instead of the spoiled, entitled child he had imagined, George appeared genuinely concerned about the welfare of others. Sarah's training told her to maintain her position, but every instinct as a human being wanted her to step forward and shield the young prince from potential danger. Her fellow guards were already moving, but George's protection officers had frozen, unsure whether intervening might escalate the situation or put the prince at greater risk. I wasn't," David stammered, his prepared angry speeches evaporating in the face of a child's simple question. The backpack slipped from his shoulder as his hands went limp at his sides. Things have been really hard, and I thought." George tilted his head slightly, studying the man's face with the kind of intense focus children use when they're trying to understand adult problems. "Are you sad about something?" "My mummy says when people are mean, it's usually because they're sad or scared about something else." The question hit David like a physical blow. In all his planning, in all his anger and resentment, he had never expected to be asked about his feelings by a 10-year-old prince. Tears began to form in his eyes as the reality of what he was doing crashed over him. He wasn't threatening some symbol of oppression. He was frightening ordinary people, including children, and potentially putting everyone in danger. Officer Mitchell watched this extraordinary exchange while maintaining her ceremonial stance, though her heart was racing. She had trained for many scenarios, but none had prepared her for witnessing such raw human emotion playing out in front of her post. The young prince's courage and compassion were remarkable, but the situation remained potentially dangerous. The crowd around them had grown larger as word spread through Windsor that something significant was happening. Tourists who had been exploring other areas of the castle grounds hurried over, their phones already recording. Local residents who recognized the commotion began gathering at the edges of the scene, some calling friends and family to tell them what they were witnessing. David sank to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of his actions and the unexpected kindness he was being shown. "I lost my job," he said quietly, his voice barely audible. "My wife left me, took my kids. I thought if I could make people see how unfair everything is." George stepped closer, despite the urgent whispers from his protection detail. "I'm sorry those bad things happened to you. That must make you feel really sad and angry. But shouting at Sarah won't fix those things, will it?" The simplicity and truth of the child's words seemed to break something loose in David's chest. He began to cry openly, his body shaking with sobs that had been building for months. The anger that had sustained him, that had brought him to this point, was draining away, leaving behind only exhaustion and regret. Sarah could see other security personnel moving into position around the perimeter, but their approach was careful and non-threatening. The situation had clearly shifted from a potential security threat to something more complex and human. Still, protocols existed for a reason, and her job was to protect the royal family, even from people who seemed to pose no immediate physical danger. Prince George looked around at the crowd of adults watching him, then back at the crying man. With the kind of decisiveness that would one day serve him well as a leader, he made a choice that surprised everyone present. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small toy airplane, one of his favorites that he had been playing with earlier. "Here," George said, holding out the toy to David. "My grandfather always says that when people are having a hard time, sometimes they just need to know someone cares about them. I care that you're sad, and I'm sorry bad things happened to you." David looked up at the offered toy, then at the young prince's earnest face. The gesture was so unexpected, so purely kind, that it seemed to reach through all his anger and pain to touch something deeper. With trembling hands, he accepted the small airplane, holding it carefully as if it were made of precious metal. The crowd watching this exchange was completely silent, except for the soft clicking of phone cameras. Many people were openly crying as they witnessed this remarkable display of compassion from such a young person. The video footage being captured would soon spread across social media platforms, but in this moment none of that mattered to anyone present. "Thank you," David whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I never meant. I just hurt so much and I didn't know what to do with all that pain." George nodded seriously as if he understood perfectly. "My daddy says that when we're hurt we have to be extra careful not to hurt other people. Maybe you could talk to someone who helps people when they're sad. There are people whose job it is to help, you know." The wisdom coming from this 10-year-old prince was astounding to everyone listening. His parents and grandparents had clearly raised him to understand not just privilege, but responsibility and compassion. The education he was receiving went far beyond traditional academics to include deep lessons about human nature and leadership. Officer Sarah Mitchell continued to maintain her position, but inside she was marveling at what she was witnessing. In 3 years of service, she had seen many interactions between the royal family and the public, but nothing had prepared her for this display of mature empathy from someone so young. David slowly got to his feet, still clutching the toy airplane. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by genuine remorse and something that might have been hope. "I need help," he said simply. "I know that now. I've been so angry for so long I forgot how to be anything else." As if summoned by some invisible signal, medical personnel and counselors who had been standing by during the incident stepped forward. Their approach was gentle and professional, offering David the support he clearly needed while ensuring the safety of everyone present. The transformation from potential threat to someone requiring assistance had been remarkable to witness. Prince George watched as the adults began to help David, his young face serious but kind. He had done something extraordinary without even realizing it, turning a moment of potential violence into an opportunity for healing and human connection. As the medical team gently guided David Crawford away for proper care and support, Prince George remained where he stood, watching with the kind of serious expression that made him look much older than his 10 years. The crowd that had gathered was beginning to disperse, but many people lingered, still processing what they had just witnessed. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Others were speaking in hushed, amazed tones about the young prince's remarkable behavior. Officer Sarah Mitchell finally allowed herself to relax slightly, though she maintained her ceremonial posture. Her mind was racing as she tried to process the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. In all her training and all the scenarios they had practiced, nothing had prepared her for witnessing such an incredible display of compassion and wisdom from a child who would one day be king. The prince's protection officers approached carefully, clearly torn between their duty to maintain his security and their recognition that he had just handled an extremely delicate situation with more grace than many trained negotiators could have managed. Chief Protection Officer Williams, a veteran with 20 years of experience, knelt down to George's level. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly. "That was very brave, but also very dangerous. We need to keep you safe, which means staying with us when situations like this arise." George nodded solemnly, understanding the gentle rebuke. "I know, Officer Williams, but she was protecting us and he was being mean to her because of us. That didn't seem fair. Someone had to say something." The logic was simple but profound. At 10 years old, Prince George had grasped something that many adults struggle with their entire lives. That privilege comes with responsibility. And that responsibility sometimes means putting oneself at risk to protect others or do what's right. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who visited daily with her small dog, approached the group with tears streaming down her face. "Your Royal Highness," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "What you just did, that man needed someone to see him as a human being, and you did that. You gave him dignity when he had lost everything else." George looked puzzled by her emotional response. "He was just sad, Mrs. Henderson. Everybody gets sad sometimes. Mummy says when people are sad, we should try to help them feel better if we can." The simplicity of his worldview was both touching and inspiring. Despite being born into unimaginable privilege, Prince George had been raised with a clear understanding of basic human kindness and the importance of caring for others. His parents had obviously worked hard to ensure he understood that his position was about service, not just status. Officer Mitchell found herself thinking about her own childhood, about the times when she had seen people in distress and wondered what she could do to help. The young prince had just demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful response to human suffering was simply acknowledging it with kindness and respect. The news reporters who had been present were already making phone calls to their editors, recognizing that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't just a human interest story about a cute royal child. This was a glimpse into the character of someone who would one day be responsible for leading a nation. Sarah Thompson, a reporter for the local BBC affiliate, approached Officer Mitchell during a brief lull in her duties. "Officer, you had a front row seat to something truly remarkable there. Have you ever seen anything like Prince George's response to that situation?" Sarah M. considered the question carefully before responding. "In my years of service, I've seen many interactions between the royal family and the public. But what Prince George did today, that showed a level of emotional intelligence and compassion that was truly exceptional. He saw past the anger to the pain underneath, and he responded with pure human kindness." The reporter nodded, scribbling notes. The video footage of this incident is already starting to spread on social media. People are calling it everything from inspiring to a glimpse of the future of the monarchy. How do you think this will impact public perception? Officer Mitchell paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think people will see what I saw today. A young person who has been raised to understand that leadership means caring for others, especially those who are struggling. That's not about politics or tradition. That's about basic human decency." Meanwhile, Prince George was being escorted back to the secure area of the castle, but his mind was clearly still on the encounter with David Crawford. He turned to Officer Williams with a question that showed how deeply he had been affected by the experience. "Officer Williams, will someone make sure that man gets the help he needs? He seemed really lonely and scared. I don't want him to stay sad like that." Williams exchanged a look with his colleagues, once again struck by the child's genuine concern for a stranger who had threatened his security. "Yes, Your Royal Highness. There are people whose job it is to help when someone is going through difficult times. He'll be taken care of." George nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Good, I hope he feels better soon. And I hope he finds a new job so he can see his children again." The fact that Prince George had listened carefully enough to understand the root causes of David's distress, and that he continued to care about the man's well-being even after the incident was over, spoke volumes about his character and the values he was being taught. Back at her post, Officer Mitchell reflected on how the morning had unfolded. She had started the day expecting routine ceremonial duties, but instead had witnessed something that would likely stay with her for the rest of her life. The young prince's actions had reminded her why she had chosen this career path, not just to serve the crown, but to be part of something larger than herself, something that represented the best of human nature. The crowd had largely dispersed now, but the atmosphere around Windsor Castle felt different somehow. The people who remained were talking quietly among themselves, many sharing their thoughts about what they had witnessed. Children who had been present were asking their parents questions about kindness and helping others, inspired by what they had seen the young prince do. As the afternoon approached, Officer Mitchell knew that word of the incident would continue to spread. In an age of social media and instant communication, extraordinary moments like this could reach millions of people within hours. But she also knew that the real impact of Prince George's actions wasn't about publicity or public relations. It was about the reminder that compassion and understanding could transform even the most difficult situations. The young prince had shown that sometimes the most powerful response to conflict wasn't force or authority, but simply seeing the humanity in another person and responding with kindness. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle, offering hope for how people might treat each other in an increasingly divided world. Within 3 hours of the incident at Windsor Castle, the first video clips had been uploaded to social media platforms across the globe. Emma Richardson, a university student who had been visiting Windsor with her international exchange program, had captured the entire exchange on her phone from beginning to end. Her footage showed not just Prince George's remarkable intervention, but also the genuine transformation in David Crawford's demeanor as the young royal's words reached him. Emma's initial post on Instagram was simple. "I can't believe what I just witnessed at Windsor Castle. This 10-year-old prince just showed more wisdom and compassion than most adults I know. Watch until the end, you won't believe it." Within the first hour, the video had been shared over 1,000 times. By evening, it had reached millions of viewers across multiple platforms. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from around the world, with people expressing amazement, inspiration, and hope. Parents wrote about showing the video to their children as an example of how to treat others with kindness. Mental health advocates praised Prince George's instinctive understanding of how to approach someone in emotional distress. Even political commentators, usually quick to criticize the monarchy, found themselves writing positive pieces about the young prince's character. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a child psychologist at Cambridge University, was among the first experts to comment publicly on the incident. What we witnessed today was not just remarkable emotional intelligence for a child of any age, but specifically the kind of leadership qualities that suggest Prince George has been raised with a deep understanding of empathy and responsibility. His ability to see past anger to the pain underneath, and to respond with compassion rather than fear, is genuinely extraordinary. The video reached David Crawford's estranged wife Jennifer within hours of its posting. She was at her parents' home, helping her children with their homework when her sister called her in excitement. "Jenny, you need to see this video. Isn't this David? What on earth happened?" Jennifer watched the footage with growing amazement and concern. She could see the pain and anger in her husband's face, emotions she recognized from the months leading up to their separation. But she could also see something else, a moment of breakthrough, of genuine human connection that she hadn't witnessed in him for a very long time. "Mummy, why is Daddy crying in that video?" asked their 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, who had been watching over her mother's shoulder. Jennifer struggled to find words that would help her daughter understand without frightening her. "Daddy has been very sad lately, sweetheart. Sometimes when grown-ups are sad for a long time, they don't know how to ask for help. But this little boy, the prince, helped Daddy remember that people care about him." The children's questions led to a long conversation about emotions, about how to help people who are struggling, and about the importance of kindness even when someone is being difficult. It was a conversation that Jennifer realized they should have had months ago, when David's behavior first began to change. Meanwhile, at the mental health facility where David Crawford was receiving evaluation and support, the staff were amazed by the positive response he was showing to treatment. Dr. Michael Thompson, the psychiatrist assigned to his case, had seen the viral video and was using it as a starting point for their sessions. "David, I want you to tell me about how you felt when Prince George spoke to you," Dr. Thompson said during their first formal session. "What was going through your mind in that moment?" David was quiet for a long time, still holding the small toy airplane the prince had given him. "I felt seen," he finally said. "For months I felt invisible, like my pain didn't matter to anyone. But this child, this little boy who has everything I don't have, he looked at me and saw a human being who was hurting, not a threat, not a problem to be solved, just someone who needed help." The breakthrough was significant. For the first time since losing his job, David was able to articulate his feelings without anger, to recognize that his pain was valid, but that his response to it had been destructive. The prince's simple question, "Are you sad about something?" had cut through months of built-up resentment and self-pity to reach the core of his struggle. Back at Windsor Castle, Prince George was initially unaware of the global attention his actions had generated. His parents, Prince William and Catherine, had sat him down for a gentle conversation about the morning's events, praising his compassion, while also explaining why approaching potentially dangerous situations wasn't safe. "What you did today showed incredible kindness, George," his mother said. "But you must always let the protection officers handle situations like that. They're trained to keep everyone safe, including people who are upset or angry." George nodded seriously. "I understand, Mummy. I just felt sorry for him. He looked so sad, and everyone was moving away from him, and I thought maybe if someone was nice to him, he would feel better." Prince William smiled at his son's reasoning. "That instinct to help others is wonderful, and it's exactly the kind of thinking that will make you a good leader someday. But being a good leader also means knowing when to trust others to do their jobs and when to keep yourself safe so you can help people in other ways." It wasn't until evening that George learned about the worldwide response to the video. His parents showed him some of the positive comments and news articles, carefully filtering out any negative or inappropriate content. George was puzzled by all the attention. "I don't understand why everyone thinks it's so special," he said. He was sad, so I tried to help him feel better. "Isn't that what anyone would do?" This response only added to the public's growing admiration for the young prince. In a world where acts of basic human kindness often seemed rare, his assumption that compassion was normal and expected was both refreshing and inspiring. The story had reached international news networks by evening. CNN, BBC World Service, and news outlets across Europe, Asia, and the Americas were featuring the incident as their lead human interest story. Royal commentators were calling it a defining moment that revealed the character of the future king, while child development experts praised the obvious success of his upbringing. Officer Sarah Mitchell found herself thrust into the spotlight as well, with multiple interview requests coming through official channels. The palace's communications team was working overtime to manage the media response, while protecting the privacy of all involved, especially Prince George. Sarah was asked to provide a statement about the incident, which she did with characteristic military precision. Prince George demonstrated remarkable maturity and compassion today. His instinct to help someone who was clearly struggling, and his ability to see past anger to the pain underneath, showed wisdom well beyond his years. As someone who serves to protect the royal family, I was impressed not just by his kindness, but by his understanding of what it means to care for others. The incident had also sparked broader conversations about mental health, economic inequality, and the importance of community support systems. Social media was filled with stories from people sharing their own experiences with depression, unemployment, and family breakdown, many expressing gratitude that these issues were being discussed openly because of Prince George's compassionate response. Mental health charities reported a significant increase in calls to their helplines in the days following the incident, with many callers specifically mentioning the video as motivation for seeking help. The ripple effects of one child's act of kindness were spreading far beyond anyone could have imagined. 3 weeks after the incident at Windsor Castle, the ripple effects of Prince George's compassionate response continued to spread across the globe in ways no one could have anticipated. The video had been translated into dozens of languages, shared by celebrities, government leaders, and ordinary people who found themselves moved by the young prince's wisdom and kindness. In classrooms around the world, teachers were using the footage as a starting point for discussions about empathy, conflict resolution, and leadership. Children were writing letters to Prince George, sharing their own stories of helping others and asking questions about how to be kind to people who seemed angry or scary. At Hillview Elementary School in Manchester, teacher Mrs. Patricia Wells had incorporated the video into her social studies curriculum. Her class of 9 and 10-year-olds had spent the week discussing what they learned from watching Prince George's response to the situation. "He wasn't scared," observed 10-year-old Marcus during their class discussion. "My dad says when someone is shouting, you should stay away from them." But the prince went closer because he wanted to help. 8-year-old Priya raised her hand eagerly. My mum says that's because he's going to be a king someday, so he has to learn how to take care of people. But I think he would have done it even if he wasn't a prince because he seems really nice. Mrs. Wells nodded approvingly. What do you think made Prince George's response so effective? Why did the angry man calm down when the prince talked to him? Because he asked why the man was sad instead of telling him to stop being mean, said Sophie thoughtfully. When my little brother is having a tantrum, it works better if I ask him what's wrong instead of just telling him to be quiet. These conversations were happening in schools across multiple continents, with educators reporting that children seemed genuinely inspired to be more thoughtful and compassionate in their own interactions. The prince's example was having a measurable impact on how young people thought about responding to conflict and distress. Meanwhile, David Crawford was making remarkable progress in his recovery. The mental health facility had been flooded with messages of support from people around the world who had seen the video and wanted to help. Donations poured in to cover his treatment costs, and several employers had reached out offering job opportunities once he was ready to return to work. Dr. Thompson was documenting David's progress for a case study that he hoped would help other mental health professionals understand the powerful impact that simple human compassion could have on someone experiencing severe depression and desperation. David's transformation had been dramatic and sustained, moving from suicidal ideation and violent thoughts to genuine hope and motivation for recovery. The prince gave me something I didn't even know I was missing, David explained during one of their sessions. He gave me dignity. For months I felt like a failure, like I had nothing to offer the world. But when he treated me like a person worth caring about, even after I had frightened people and caused a scene, it reminded me that I was still human. I still mattered. The small toy airplane that Prince George had given him sat on the bedside table in David's room, a constant reminder of that moment of connection. He had written several letters to the young prince, though he hadn't sent them yet, unsure if it was appropriate. In them, he tried to express his gratitude and to let George know how much that simple act of kindness had changed his life. At Windsor Castle, the royal family was still processing the enormous global response to the incident. Prince George had received thousands of letters and gifts from around the world, though palace protocol meant that most items had to be examined by security before reaching him. The letters, however, were carefully screened and many were shared with the young prince. Reading these messages from children and adults across the globe had a profound impact on George. He began to understand, in ways appropriate for his age, that his actions and words carried weight beyond what he had imagined. His parents used this as an opportunity to discuss the responsibilities that came with his position, but also the incredible opportunity he had to make a positive difference in the world. People are writing to tell me about times when they helped someone who was sad or angry, George told his father during one of their evening walks around the castle grounds. A girl in Australia wrote that she stood up for a boy who was being bullied because she remembered what I did. That makes me feel really happy. Prince William smiled at his son's growing understanding of his influence. That's the amazing thing about kindness, George. When people see it, it inspires them to be kinder too. It spreads like ripples in a pond. The analogy resonated with George, who had always loved throwing stones into the castle's pond to watch the circular waves expand outward. The idea that kindness could spread in the same way fascinated him and would influence how he thought about his actions for years to come. Officer Sarah Mitchell had become something of a celebrity herself, though she remained focused on her duties and handled the attention with characteristic professionalism. She had been invited to speak at several events about crisis de-escalation and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure, though she consistently redirected praise toward Prince George's remarkable response. The incident had also led to policy discussions at the highest levels of royal security. While everyone agreed that Prince George's intervention had been extraordinary and ultimately positive, it had also highlighted potential vulnerabilities in their protective protocols. Security procedures were quietly reviewed and updated to ensure that such situations could be managed even more effectively in the future. Mental health organizations worldwide had seized on the incident as an opportunity to raise awareness about depression, unemployment-related stress, and the importance of seeking help before reaching crisis points. The video was being used in training programs for police officers, social workers, and mental health professionals as an example of how compassion and human connection could diffuse potentially dangerous situations. Dr. Amanda Foster, who ran a crisis intervention program in London, had incorporated analysis of the incident into her training curriculum. What Prince George demonstrated, she told her students, was something we call emotional intelligence in action. He instinctively understood that anger is often a surface emotion hiding deeper pain, and he responded to the pain rather than the anger. It's a technique we train professionals to use, but he did it naturally at age 10. The global conversation sparked by the incident had also led to increased funding for mental health services in several countries. Politicians who had watched the video found themselves moved to action, with legislation being proposed to improve access to mental health care and support for unemployed workers. In Canada, Member of Parliament Rachel Morrison stood in the House of Commons holding a printed screenshot from the video. If a 10-year-old prince can show this level of compassion and wisdom in dealing with someone in crisis, she said, then surely we as elected officials can find the courage and resources to better support our citizens who are struggling. Similar speeches were being made in parliaments and Congress buildings around the world, as the image of Prince George's patient, kind response to David Crawford became a symbol of how leaders should approach those they serve, especially those who are most vulnerable. 3 weeks after the incident at Windsor Castle, the ripple effects of Prince George's compassionate response continued to spread across the globe in ways no one could have anticipated. The video had been translated into dozens of languages, shared by celebrities, government leaders, and ordinary people who found themselves moved by the young prince's wisdom and kindness. In classrooms around the world, teachers were using the footage as a starting point for discussions about empathy, conflict resolution, and leadership. Children were writing letters to Prince George, sharing their own stories of helping others and asking questions about how to be kind to people who seemed angry or scary. At Hillview Elementary School in Manchester, teacher Mrs. Patricia Wells had incorporated the video into her social studies curriculum. Her class of 9 and 10-year-olds had spent the week discussing what they learned from watching Prince George's response to the situation. He wasn't scared, observed 10-year-old Marcus during their class discussion. My dad says when someone is shouting, you should stay away from them. But the prince went closer because he wanted to help. 8-year-old Priya raised her hand eagerly. My mum says that's because he's going to be a king someday, so he has to learn how to take care of people. But I think he would have done it even if he wasn't a prince because he seems really nice. Mrs. Wells nodded approvingly. What do you think made Prince George's response so effective? Why did the angry man calm down when the prince talked to him? Because he asked why the man was sad instead of telling him to stop being mean, said Sophie thoughtfully. When my little brother is having a tantrum, it works better if I ask him what's wrong instead of just telling him to be quiet. These conversations were happening in schools across multiple continents, with educators reporting that children seemed genuinely inspired to be more thoughtful and compassionate in their own interactions. The prince's example was having a measurable impact on how young people thought about responding to conflict and distress. Meanwhile, David Crawford was making remarkable progress in his recovery. The mental health facility had been flooded with messages of support from people around the world who had seen the video and wanted to help. Donations poured in to cover his treatment costs, and several employers had reached out offering job opportunities once he was ready to return to work. Dr. Thompson was documenting David's progress for a case study that he hoped would help other mental health professionals understand the powerful impact that simple human compassion could have on someone experiencing severe depression and desperation. David's transformation had been dramatic and sustained, moving from suicidal ideation and violent thoughts to genuine hope and motivation for recovery. The prince gave me something I didn't even know I was missing, David explained during one of their sessions. He gave me dignity. For months I felt like a failure, like I had nothing to offer the world. But when he treated me like a person worth caring about, even after I had frightened people and caused a scene, it reminded me that I was still human. I still mattered. The small toy airplane that Prince George had given him sat on the bedside table in David's room, a constant reminder of that moment of connection. He had written several letters to the young prince, though he hadn't sent them yet, unsure if it was appropriate. In them, he tried to express his gratitude and to let George know how much that simple act of kindness had changed his life. At Windsor Castle, the royal family was still processing the enormous global response to the incident. Prince George had received thousands of letters and gifts from around the world, though palace protocol meant that most items had to be examined by security before reaching him. The letters, however, were carefully screened, and many were shared with the young prince. Reading these messages from children and adults across the globe had a profound impact on George. He began to understand, in ways appropriate for his age, that his actions and words carried weight beyond what he had imagined. His parents used this as an opportunity to discuss the responsibilities that came with his position, but also the incredible opportunity he had to make a positive difference in the world. People are writing to tell me about times when they helped someone who was sad or angry, George told his father during one of their evening walks around the castle grounds. A girl in Australia wrote that she stood up for a boy who was being bullied because she remembered what I did. That makes me feel really happy. Prince William smiled at his son's growing understanding of his influence. That's the amazing thing about kindness, George. When people see it, it inspires them to be kinder too. It spreads like ripples in a pond. The analogy resonated with George, who had always loved throwing stones into the castle's pond to watch the circular waves expand outward. The idea that kindness could spread in the same way fascinated him and would influence how he thought about his actions for years to come. Officer Sarah Mitchell had become something of a celebrity herself, though she remained focused on her duties and handled the attention with characteristic professionalism. She had been invited to speak at several events about crisis de-escalation and the importance of maintaining composure under pressure, though she consistently redirected praise toward Prince George's remarkable response. The incident had also led to policy discussions at the highest levels of royal security. While everyone agreed that Prince George's intervention had been extraordinary and ultimately positive, it had also highlighted potential vulnerabilities in their protective protocols. Security procedures were quietly reviewed and updated to ensure that such situations could be managed even more effectively in the future. Mental health organizations worldwide had seized on the incident as an opportunity to raise awareness about depression, unemployment-related stress, and the importance of seeking help before reaching crisis points. The video was being used in training programs for police officers, social workers, and mental health professionals as an example of how compassion and human connection could diffuse potentially dangerous situations. Dr. Amanda Foster, who ran a crisis intervention program in London, had incorporated analysis of the incident into her training curriculum. What Prince George demonstrated, she told her students, was something we call emotional intelligence in action. He instinctively understood that anger is often a surface emotion hiding deeper pain, and he responded to the pain rather than the anger. It's a technique we train professionals to use, but he did it naturally at age 10. The global conversation sparked by the incident had also led to increased funding for mental health services in several countries. Politicians who had watched the video found themselves moved to action, with legislation being proposed to improve access to mental health care and support for unemployed workers. In Canada, Member of Parliament Rachel Morrison stood in the House of Commons holding a printed screenshot from the video. If a 10-year-old prince can show this level of compassion and wisdom in dealing with someone in crisis, she said, then surely we as elected officials can find the courage and resources to better support our citizens who are struggling. Similar speeches were being made in parliaments and Congress buildings around the world, as the image of Prince George's patient, kind response to David Crawford became a symbol of how leaders should approach those they serve, especially those who are most vulnerable. 1 year after the incident that had captivated the world, the impact of Prince George's compassionate response continued to reverberate in ways both profound and practical. What had begun as a moment of crisis at Windsor Castle had evolved into a global movement of kindness that touched lives across continents and cultures. David Crawford stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Oxford, delivering a lecture as part of their Mental Health Awareness Week. His transformation from a desperate, angry man to an articulate advocate for mental health support had been remarkable to witness. He now worked full-time as a peer counselor and had been reunited with his children, who visited him every weekend and had begun to heal from the trauma of their family's breakdown. A year ago, I was standing in front of Windsor Castle, consumed by rage and despair, David told the assembled students and faculty. I had lost everything that mattered to me, my job, my family, my sense of purpose. But in that moment of darkness, a 10-year-old boy taught me something that professional counselors and self-help books hadn't been able to reach me with. That my pain was valid. But my response to it was my choice. He paused, looking out at the hundreds of young faces watching him intently. Many of them were struggling with their own mental health challenges, academic pressure, and uncertainty about the future. His story had become a beacon of hope for people who felt overwhelmed by life's difficulties. Prince George didn't fix my problems, David continued. He didn't wave a magic wand and give me back my job or repair my marriage. What he did was far more powerful. He reminded me of my own humanity at a moment when I had forgotten it completely. He showed me that even in my worst moment, I was still worthy of compassion and respect. The lecture hall was completely silent, except for the soft sound of people wiping tears from their eyes. David's story had lost none of its power to move people, even after being told countless times around the world. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Prince George was celebrating his 11th birthday, with a party that reflected both his royal status and his remarkably grounded personality. Among the carefully curated guest list were children from local schools, young people involved in charitable organizations, and several families who had been helped by the mental health initiatives that had grown out of the incident a year earlier. The prince had specifically requested that part of his birthday celebration include a fundraising component for mental health charities. Instead of receiving gifts, he had asked guests to make donations to organizations that help people like David Crawford. His parents had been amazed but not surprised by this request, recognizing it as completely consistent with their son's character. "I have everything I need," George had explained to his mother when discussing the birthday plans, "but there are people who are sad and scared and don't know how to ask for help. If my birthday can help them, that would make me happier than any present could." Officer Sarah Mitchell, now promoted to Senior Protection Officer, continued to serve at Windsor Castle and had become something of an expert on crisis intervention within the Royal Protection Service. The incident with David Crawford had led to enhanced training programs for all royal security personnel, focusing not just on threat assessment, but on recognizing signs of mental distress and responding with appropriate compassion. Sarah often found herself thinking about that remarkable morning, when Prince George had stepped forward with such courage and wisdom. It had changed her perspective on her role as a protector, helping her understand that sometimes the best way to ensure safety was through human connection rather than force or authority. The global impact of Prince George's actions had continued to grow throughout the year. The video of the incident had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, sparking countless discussions about empathy, leadership, and mental health awareness. Schools around the world had incorporated the story into their curricula, using it to teach children about emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. In Japan, a group of elementary school students had created a presentation about Prince George's response, which they performed for their parents and community members. In Brazil, a mental health organization had adopted the George Principle as part of their crisis intervention training, teaching counselors to look for the pain behind aggressive behavior and respond with compassion rather than confrontation. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the child psychologist who had first commented on Prince George's remarkable emotional intelligence, had published a research paper studying the incident and its aftermath. Her work had become required reading in developmental psychology programs, offering insights into how children develop empathy and moral reasoning. "What makes Prince George's response so extraordinary," Dr. Martinez wrote, "is not just the compassion he showed, but his instinctive understanding that conflict often stems from unmet emotional needs. His ability to recognize and respond to David Crawford's underlying pain, while maintaining his own safety and dignity, represents a level of emotional sophistication that many adults never achieve." The anniversary of the incident was marked by a special documentary on BBC, featuring interviews with David Crawford, Dr. Thompson, Officer Mitchell, and several of the bystanders who had witnessed the event. While Prince George and his family chose not to participate directly in the documentary, they released a statement expressing their pride in how the incident had inspired positive change around the world. "We are grateful that what could have been a frightening experience became an opportunity for healing and hope," the statement read. The response from people around the world has demonstrated the fundamental goodness that exists in human nature and the power of small acts of kindness to create profound change. David Crawford's children had also been profoundly affected by their father's transformation and the global response to his story. His daughter Lucy, now 9 years old, had started a kindness club at her school, encouraging classmates to look for opportunities to help others who seemed sad or left out. His son Thomas had written a letter to Prince George, thanking him for helping their father and expressing his own commitment to being kind to others. The mental health facility where David had received treatment had established the Prince George Fellowship, a program providing free counseling services to people experiencing crisis situations related to unemployment and family breakdown. The program had helped hundreds of individuals and families in its first year, funded entirely by donations from people who had been moved by the original story. As Officer Mitchell stood at her post on the anniversary morning, watching tourists and well-wishers gather at Windsor Castle, she reflected on how much had changed in the past year. The incident had reminded everyone involved that behind every act of aggression or desperation was a human being in pain, and that sometimes the most powerful response was simply to acknowledge that pain with kindness and respect. Prince George, now a year older but still possessed of the same natural empathy that had marked his response to David Crawford, continued to grow into his role as a future leader with wisdom and grace. His actions on that autumn morning had set a standard for compassionate leadership that would influence his approach to royal duties for the rest of his life. The small toy airplane that had started it all still sat on David Crawford's desk at the mental health center where he worked, a daily reminder of the moment when a child's simple act of kindness had changed the course of his life. It had become a symbol of hope for the many people David counseled, proof that even in the darkest moments, unexpected help could arrive from the most surprising sources. The story of Prince George and David Crawford had become more than just a viral video or a heartwarming news story. It had become a testament to the transformative power of human compassion and a reminder that sometimes the most profound acts of leadership come not from those with the most power, but from those with the greatest capacity for understanding and kindness.